What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through my top 10 rookie wide receiver rankings. Went through my running backs a couple of days ago. Now we are locking in at the wide receiver position. I think it's an interesting class. Not going to say it's overly stacked, but I think there are like 4 or 5 really quality options at the wide receiver position. And then the guys that are probably going like day 2, round 3. I just think there's a lot of guys in that potential bucket. And I just don't think there's going to be a lot of consensus, which, makes it pretty interesting. So let's just dive right into tier 1 here. My only tier 1 wide receiver, I have Tet McMillan. He was someone who's productive in all 3 seasons. As a true freshman, he produced right away, 39 receptions, 702 receiving yards, 8 receiving touchdowns. And then as a sophomore and junior, he went for 1,300 plus yards in both those seasons. He has great ball skills, caught 55% of his contested targets, only at a 5.3% drop rate throughout his college career. He's a big wide receiver, so he's not going to be like crazy elusive after the catch, but I think he has pretty solid yak given his size. Also doubled his missed tackles force from 2023 to 2024. So definitely showed improvement, in that area. I do expect him at this point to be the wide receiver 1 off the board. Has the potential to be a top 10 pick. Like when we're looking at these mock drafts, like he's going as early as like pick 4 or 5, and then sometimes you don't see a wide receiver in like the first 15 picks. So I don't think he has like a locked in area at this point, but top 10 certainly wouldn't surprise me with his statistical profile. I think he's a pretty fun prospect here. Now my tier 2 wide receiver, also only have one guy in this tier. I'm going to have Emeka Egbuka, and I think some people are kind of split on him. Some view him as like a lower ceiling option, and I'm not going to say he has like the craziest ceiling, but I just think he has a skill set to deliver wide receiver 2 fantasy production pretty much as soon as he steps onto the field in his rookie season. He has 3 years of strong production at Ohio State, big sophomore and senior seasons, and he just overlapped with some insanely talented wide receivers: Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, JSN, Marvin Harrison Jr., Jeremiah Smith. When we're looking at these Ohio State wide receivers and like comparing all the ones that played together, if they're producing like on those teams with those other studs, odds are they're going to pan out at the NFL level. And that's really what we've seen, right? Garrett Wilson has been super productive. Chris Olave, when he's been able to stay on the field, has been impressive. JSN, kind of a slow year 1, really impressive year 2. And then Marv, I do expect him to take a leap heading into his second season here. Egbuka played primarily out of the slot. Not going to be some sort of like freak athlete, but he's a super clean route runner, a really smart player. Like I said, I just think he could step into pretty much any offense and deliver like fantasy wide receiver 2 production. Fully expect him to go in the first round, and he's probably not going to be a guy that's going like top 15, top 16. So he could definitely find himself in like a fun landing spot on a playoff team with a nice quarterback situation. So he's my tier 2 guy. Now, moving into tier 3, I have Travis Hunter. Obviously, the Hunter situation is just like a nightmare to try to navigate, right? If you have him higher than this, I get it because the ceiling's there. If you're out on him and you're like, I don't want to take on the risk, I also get it. The way I look at it is that if he was just purely a wide receiver, didn't play defense, he would be my wide receiver 1 in this class. He's coming off a monster 2024 season, caught 96 passes for over 1,250 receiving yards, 15 receiving touchdowns, and that's while playing full-time corner. So he had an amazing year, and there's no telling how good or like how high of a ceiling he could have reached if he was just like locked in on offense and wasn't, exerting an insane amount of energy, 50% of his energy on the other side of the ball. He has amazing ball skills, obviously for a corner, but also for a wide receiver. He's someone who didn't have to rely on contested catches, which is good. You don't want a ton of contested targets because it's kind of telling you that the guy's not really able to get open, not really getting that separation. So he did not have a high percentage of contested targets, but he caught 63.3% of them, which is an insanely high number. So you love to see that. He's a great route runner, extremely twitchy, explosive. The big question is just going to be what position is he going to play and like where are you willing to draft him to take on that risk, right? Because if he goes to a team and they say you're primarily a corner and you're going to run 15 to 20 routes, that's probably not something that's super playable for fantasy. On the other hand, if he goes to a team, I think it was the Browns GM came out and said they view him more as a wide receiver. If he's going to a landing spot like that and they just say you're a wide receiver and you're drafting him like late round 1, maybe even early round 2 in rookie drafts, then I think he's going to be an absolute steal, because I'd be probably willing to take him as high as like the 102 if I knew he was locked in at the wide receiver position. So extremely talented player, just an incredibly unique situation here. And I think, everyone's just going to have to figure out their own risk tolerance there. And then my other 2 tier 3 wide receivers, I think these guys are interesting, so I'm kind of just going to lump them in together here. I have Luther Burden at number 4, and then Matthew Golden at number 5. I actually swapped Burden and Golden since I did my rankings earlier on in the week. I do think draft capital is going to be a big factor here. If they both have equal draft capital, so say they both go like late round 1, I will prefer Luther Burden over Matthew Golden. I think there's a real case, though, that if Matthew Golden goes like somewhere around 1, late round 1, you're probably getting a fun landing spot, and then Burden slips into the second, I think at that point, I'm probably going to side with a guy like Matthew Golden. Luther Burden's an extremely fun player. He's electric with the ball in his hands. He had 6+ yak per reception in all 3 of his college seasons. He actually led all wide receivers in missed tackles forced this past year, and that was despite him being 100th in targets. So it's not like he was just getting like peppered with opportunities and it was like a volume stat. Like, he is making dudes miss at a very, very high rate. Also has great ball skills, 55 and 57% contested catch rate in his last 2 seasons. I just think landing spot's going to be huge for him. I think maybe in my previous video, I was gearing a little too into the negatives on like where this could go wrong. And I certainly do think there are ways this could go wrong, right? He's someone who relies on manufactured touches, doesn't have a ton of experience, winning downfield. The reason why he didn't have a great junior season is like, oh, he was misused. They didn't, use him properly. And that's just tough because some of these other wide receivers, I don't really know if you can misuse them. And that's obviously something that could end up happening at the NFL level. And the reason why I think draft capital is huge in this situation and more important than normal is that if he's going late round 1, first off, a team spending that round 1 capital on him, they're more invested. They're going to be more willing to kind of cater an offense around his skill set. And then he's also just going to a good landing spot with successful teams, likely to a quarterback situation, a coach situation where you can trust these guys, maximize their players. On the other hand, if he's slipping into the early second or even like mid-second, you're going to not so great landing spots. Don't really know if those coaching staffs can be trusted to really maximize him. And then also you're just not investing as much in the player, which, might limit his involvement in the offense. So I think he's super interesting. I hope he goes late round 1, but we'll just kind of see how it plays out. And then my other guy here, Matthew Golden, I'm just more confident in his draft capital. I do think with his crazy combine numbers, he will be going in the first round. He's certainly not like a perfect statistical profile, didn't have a super exciting sophomore season, but he produced as a true freshman at Houston, in a wide receiver room that had Tank Dell as the top dog. And then he emerged as Texas's wide receiver 1 this past year. Didn't put up crazy numbers, slow start to the season, but really just dominated towards the end of the year. He had his best games against the toughest competition, so you can certainly see where Matthew Golden's an intriguing option. He's a great route runner, backed up the athleticism at the combine. Both those guys are going to be in tier 3 for me. And then moving into tier 4, I think this is where we're just going to have a lot of variance in how people view these wide receivers. My, top choice outside the top 5 is Jaden Higgins. I just think there's a lot to like with him. Big frame, 6'4", 214 pounds. Tested well at the combine, ran a 4.47 40, which at that size is certainly impressive. Jumped pretty well also. Started off at Eastern Kentucky, played 2 seasons there, and then followed that up with 2 really strong seasons at Iowa State. Logged a 3 yards per route run in 2023, and then this past season, just under 1,200 yards, 9 receiving touchdowns. He has great hands, only 4 total drops in his last 3 seasons, good in contested catch situations, 56% contested catch rate. Overall, just a pretty fun player. You're hoping he gets a fun landing spot somewhere in round 2. Then after him, I have Alec Iamaner, and I've kind of been up and down on Iamaner. I think he's an interesting mix of some pros and cons here. So he missed his freshman season the entire year with a torn ACL, but then right when he stepped on the field, he was productive. 2023, 63 receptions for 1,022 yards, 6 touchdowns. That included a game where he caught 13 passes for 294 yards and 3 touchdowns against Travis Hunter. So against, one of the top cornerbacks in the country, he delivered just a nuclear game, not even a good game, like insane performance against Travis Hunter in Colorado. Then in 2024, kind of similar numbers, 63 receptions, 831 receiving yards, 6 touchdowns. It's important to point out that he was playing on bad Stanford teams that had bad offenses. I mean, those 2 seasons, he accounted for 37 and 36% of his team's receiving yards. So he pretty much was the passing attack when it came to Stanford. Some red flags here for a guy like Alec Eiermanner. 27% of his targets in his college career were contested. That's not great. That's kind of getting up there a little bit. The other thing that's not great is that he wasn't overly effective with those opportunities. So if you're going to be commanding a lot of contested catch situations, you want to at least be really good in them. He caught 14 out of 29, actually in both seasons, funny enough. I don't know how it ended up being the exact same numbers, but so under 50% in both seasons. Also had an 8.7% drop rate both seasons. So those numbers are just like super in line. But when you're getting into like that 27, 28% area, that's where you're running into like the Quentin Johnstons, the N'Keal Harrys, some of these wide receivers that are going round 1 but just aren't finding a ton of success in the NFL. But it's also kind of a fine line because once you're getting like 25, 24, there's a lot of really quality wide receivers in there. Like I think Jamar Chase is in that area, T. Higgins. So he's kind of like right on that in between where you can see the upside, but also reason for some concern. He's also just not great after the catch, under 4 yak per reception in 2024. I was kind of surprised with how well he tested because when you're looking at a guy who's getting a lot of contested targets, not doing much after the catch, you're kind of assuming, right? This guy's probably not some sort of like freak athlete, but he came in at like 6 foot, 6'1", 206 pounds, running 4.44 40, which is impressive. Jumped really well. I think there's also just some question marks on where he's going to play at the NFL level. Kind of a guy like Keon Coleman last year, where there were some people who thought he would play outside. He was another guy who had a super high percentage of contested targets in his final season and wasn't super effective with them. But it was like, all right, is he going to play outside? Is he going to be a power slot? I feel like it's kind of a similar thing here for Eiermanner. For Keon Coleman, we saw the Bills pretty much play him entirely on the outside. Didn't lead to a great rookie year. They kind of have a ton of dudes that can fill into that slot role. So it'll be interesting to see where he plays. I do think he's getting round 2 capital. So someone who I, have some clear positives and negatives for. And then my final guy here in tier 4, I have Jalen Royals, coming off of back-to-back big seasons at Utah State. 2023, caught 70 passes for 1,084 yards, 15 touchdowns. And then in 2024, he only played in 7 games, but he went 55 for 839 and 6 touchdowns, and then just had an insane end to his season. I think he ended it with a foot injury, but his last 4 games went 10 for 112 and a touchdown, 9 for 211 and 2 touchdowns, 10 for 155 and a touchdown, and then 11 for 188 and a touchdown. So just like 4 straight nuclear performances. He has a fun skill set, great at tracking the ball down the field, 64.1% contested catch rate throughout his career. He's extremely elusive after the catch, just under 8 yak per reception in 2024. So I think he's a fun player. I do expect him to get round 2 capital. Had a fine 40, didn't necessarily like dominate it, but certainly a time that plays. He's going to wrap up my tier 4. And then a couple of guys here in tier 5. I think there's a lot of wide receivers that could be in the mix here. At number 9, I went with Trey Harris. Kind of an interesting college career. Started off with 3 seasons at Louisiana Tech, then transfers and plays his final 2 seasons at Ole Miss. He's a big play threat, 16.1 career yards per reception, 17.7 yards per reception in his 2 years at Ole Miss. Logged just an insane 5.12 yards per route run in 2024, which is truly a crazy number. Like above 3 is like an amazing year. A guy like Ted McMillan never hit that 3 yards per route run number. So 5.12 is wild. I do think it's kind of tough to predict how he's going to translate to the NFL. He had a pretty limited role, limited route tree at Ole Miss. That offense just kind of runs like a fine oiled machine, not something that can translate super well to the NFL. So not saying he can't be good, but there's just some uncertainty there. I do think he's likely going to be getting round 2 draft capital though. And then my final guy here, I went with Xavier Restrepo. I think draft capital is going to be a question mark. He doesn't seem like someone who's getting a ton of hype to go in round 2. If he did go round 2, wouldn't be shocked, but don't think he's getting as much hype as some of these other guys. I just think he's someone, when we're looking at this like pool of wide receivers, I feel like he has a real shot to earn a role in the slot on an NFL roster. Played 92% of his snaps in the slot in college, compact build, 5'10, 210, played 5 years at Miami. Really just broke out like his senior and then like fifth year. Had back to back 1,000+ yard seasons. Great hands. Not going to be some sort of like freak athlete, but he's quick. He's a technical route runner. He's a fun player, has good awareness after the catch to get extra yards. He's also a willing blocker despite not being the biggest dude. So I think he definitely has like really solid PPR potential. Like if he just came out and all of a sudden was like a fantasy wide receiver 3 as a rookie, I really wouldn't be shocked by it. And then I'll just run through some honorable mentions. I think Jalen Knoll is interesting, Jack Besh, Isaiah Bond, Savion Williams, Torrey Horton. Like these are all guys that would probably be in like this extended tier. Obviously, draft capital will play a role, and we'll just see, how these guys look moving forward. But that's going to wrap it up for my top 10. Let me know your thoughts. Who's too high? Who's too low? Who should have been in these rankings? Thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.